If you can't join in person, it is totally fine to join on Zoom. The vast majority of our classes will be on Zoom starting next Monday. Our first week is in person, just because we find it's easier to kind of teach Mac basics and getting comfortable with things there. So starting on Monday, our class will be all in Zoom. In Canvas, you'll see over on the left here, in addition to assignments, there's also a section called modules. If you go into modules, you'll see we've got all of our links here. So the Zoom classroom will launch you right in. If you don't have a Zoom account created yet, definitely sign up for one. It won't let you into the Zoom classroom without a Zoom account created and this specific link. You'll see that I've got a ton of different outlines over here. This is what we're covering every day and has links to the things that we're going over. That is all in the C6 daily outlines. You'll also see that we've got a schedule here. That is a massive spreadsheet. This is where you will go for all of the YouTube links. So this is not only the title of the class, but after every class by like 9:30, 10 o'clock, if my bot is working with me, it will take the recording from Zoom and automatically upload it to YouTube. So all of those links will start appearing here in the spreadsheet about an hour after class ends. So if you're ever absent for a class, trying to watch that YouTube video before the next night's class is really, really helpful, because I want to say a good 80% of our classes build off of each other, right? So what we did yesterday is going to be the starting point for what we're doing today. So if you do miss a class, trying to watch the YouTube link is a really good thing to do. And if you can train yourself up to watching videos at a faster playback speed, that will be really, really beneficial for you. So when you're watching a YouTube video, if you go to the gear down in the bottom right, you can do this on your phone or your laptop. You can hit playback speed and up that speed. So you can go to 1.25 and I'll sound a little bit more like a chipmunk, but you get used to that. And then you get up to a week or two later, 1.5, all the way up to 2x. It is a really, really great life hack. Cannot recommend that enough. So anyway, back to Canvas. The link to Zoom, the daily outlines, which you can see over here is what we'll be covering every day. The schedule is our spreadsheet, not only of all the YouTube links, but this also has our holidays and probably most importantly, what modules we're covering, right? So we're going to go over the tech stack a little bit later tonight. But if you kind of want a preview of what we're doing in what weeks and, you know, how the program will progress, all of the modules are listed across the top here. They just alternate color to make it easier for you to read. The color doesn't really mean anything, but you can see we start in HTML and CSS next week. We'll start writing code on Monday, and then the modules will progress from there into computer science and JavaScript, DevOps, full-on JavaScript, APIs, all of that good stuff. We'll get into more of that later. In Canvas, we also have this 30-second feedback form, and this is going to be 180 of what you are used to from a college setting. If you've ever taken a college class, you know, when you get that survey at the end of the semester and they want to know how your professor was, that is literally the worst time to ask for feedback. You just went through the entire class. Don't you wish you could just give feedback in the middle of it? So if the professor were doing something bad, they could improve on it? That's what this 30-second feedback form is. So in the first cohort, we had a form that was about a mile long and no one filled it out because it took 30 minutes to fill out. We have way simplified that down. So what we ask is, it doesn't have to be at the end of every class. It can be if you are someone who loves giving feedback, but this is a quick little feedback form. And I get an email every time someone fills this out. So I absolutely love, one of my favorite things of teaching is going back in and looking at these feedback submissions, because not only do I figure out what I did well, but more importantly, I figure out where I lost you guys. And these forms are reviewed, I mean it, every single night. So that means that if you put something in here, there is a good chance we'll use that feedback to start class the next day to recover that content, try and clear it up, make it a little easier to understand. The one thing I will say about this feedback form is you can fill it out anonymously. So if you leave a comment and you would like someone to respond to you directly, obviously I need to know your name. However, you can leave your name blank and fill out this form, and it is absolutely truly anonymous. You see, it says your email and then it says not shared here. It is truly anonymous. We have no way of knowing if you do not put your name in here. So this form, super easy. Other than your name, just 3 questions. Hey, welcome. How well did you get the topics this week? How was the speed of tonight's class? And what's your feedback? Just give us some notes. And you can go in here and you can just say, you know what? Class tonight was way too fast, but I didn't really get the topics. I don't really have anything to say other than this went way too quickly for me to understand. You can fill that out. Or we've had people write entire novels in the section, right? Here's where I struggled. This was a good resource. This was a bad resource. Can we cover this again tomorrow? Whatever it is, you can fill out any of your notes here, and we will review that every single night. So the 30-second feedback form is really different from traditional education and really, really valuable for me as an instructor to make sure that everyone is following along. So again, that is in the module section. Under 30-second feedback, we would love if you fill that out every night. If you are more comfortable filling it out every week, that's totally fine. If you feel like you have no feedback to share and you want to do it every other week, that is also fine. Hey, welcome. It is truly anonymous, so we can't really know if you're doing it or not, but we can certainly tell when we're not getting a lot of submissions. So that 30-second feedback form, one of the best things that you can do for your education. I'm going to take a pause there. Does anyone have questions so far? If there's not a seat, feel free to grab one from out in the common area. Mentor meeting report. We're going to get into more details about the whole mentor program. You'll have an opportunity to meet all of the mentors on Thursday. All of the mentors are either alumni who have graduated the program or are senior developers who have had experience with careers in code, have been a guest speaker, or have some industry experience. So we ask that you meet with your mentor once you're assigned to them, once at least every other week for about 15 minutes, right? And that mentor meeting is not meant to be a tutoring session. It's meant to be more of a check-in. Hey, this is going fast. I'm struggling with this. More of a, hey, how are things going? When you went through the program, did you struggle with this? Do you have any tips or tricks? Whatever it may be. Those meetings will usually be virtual, unless you work with your mentor and say like, hey, I'd love to grab a cup of coffee with you. And that's totally fine. Whenever you meet is totally fine as long as it's not during class. But other than that, this mentor program is totally new, this cohort. So we've kind of removed the notion of TA and moved towards mentors. And so you'll get more details about that on Wednesday, questions to think about, what you would like to meet your mentor, or when you meet your mentor, what you would like to ask them. And we'll have more details about that coming down the pipeline. For now, nothing you need to worry about, but just like the 30-second feedback form, really quick. And that is a requirement to fill out once at least every other week. If you're meeting with your mentor more, fine to fill that out more often. But that mentor report is almost as important as your homework is in this course, right? Your mentor is your connection to us to make sure that you're doing well. And the easiest, biggest way to raise a red flag for us to find you and figure out what's going on, other than missing class, is to not fill out this meeting report every other week, right? Because we meet every week and we check in on who's meeting with their mentor, what scores they've given themselves, what scores the mentors have given them. And if there is any red X on that spreadsheet, where it's a major red flag of, all right, let's reach out, figure out what's going on. So that is the mentor report. Next up is my calendar. So if you haven't worked with Calendly before, it is a really great website that allows you to book directly with me and see all the times that I'm available. So this can be for tutoring, this can be for just a venting session, this can be for, hey, I'm having this problem, I just want to give you a heads up. You come in here, you pick either a 12 or 25-minute meeting. Yes, those sound like really weird meeting times, but there is a reasoning behind it. If you are a book reader, there is a really great quick read called the 25-minute meeting. And it is all about how we are killing ourselves because of meeting culture in the US. One of the major problems is we're always in meetings and never have time to act on what we talked about in those meetings, right? And so what the reason why my meetings are 12 and 25 minutes is I need 5 minutes at the end of the meeting to write down notes, to figure out what the action items are, to make sure that what we discussed in that meeting doesn't fall off my radar or your radar. And so the reason why I have the 12 and 25-minute meetings is that gives me a breathing gap, right? That also means that I'm probably not going to be late for my next meeting because I had 5 minutes from my previous meeting to meet with the right person. So once you get into this Calendly, you can click into it. You can see what days I'm available, what days I'm not available. You can go, oh, I wonder what times he's available on Saturday. It will show you all of those times. When you click in to one of them and hit next, really easy to book, your name, your email address, a quick purpose of the meeting. Please try to avoid one-word answers here. Even just a summary, like a one-sentence summary can be really helpful for me to get me in the right mind space the morning of the meeting of, hey, who am I meeting with? What are we talking about? And then if you want a text message reminder of the meeting, you can do that. This is, I believe it sends 24 hours and 1 hour before the meeting. Putting your phone number in there is optional. It's just an automated reminder of our meeting. That will always be in Zoom and you'll never get a phone call. So when you hit this final schedule event button, it will give you a calendar link to download, and then it will also send you an email with a Zoom link in it. So you won't get any phone calls from me. I will send you a Slack message if you're running a couple minutes late and say, hey, are we still planning on meeting? But this is the best way to get on my calendar. You get a Zoom link, and unless you asked me at the beginning of the session to not record it, those sessions are also recorded. So you'll get an email about a half hour after we meet with a link to that recording. Doesn't sound very substantial or very important until we start using these meetings to code in them. And we'll work on things. We'll talk through things. You'll get off the call and be like, I can't believe that was 30 minutes. What did we just do 25 minutes ago, right? And so MaxBot will send you a link to the recording of this, unless you are like, recording creeps me out. I don't feel comfortable about this. The recording only goes to you. It does not get posted on YouTube if it is a one-on-one like class videos do. But if you would prefer it not to be recorded, that is totally fine. The recording is for benefit of you, not of me. So if you don't think that you'll benefit from the recording, just ask me at the beginning of the meeting, and I will turn that off. One-on-one's probably the most important thing you can utilize throughout this program because we're going to go fast and you're going to need help. It's on you guys to reach out for that help, and my calendar is the best way to do that. Okay. Finish going over these modules. Hopefully the rest will go a little quickly. We have a little vocab list from last cohort. If you are someone who learns through vocab or flashcards, the terms list is a great resource for you to use. Capstone requirements, I'm totally going to gloss over for now. If you are curious, you are welcome to read through there, but we won't start looking at the capstone until about week 3 or 4. So if you feel a little overwhelmed, definitely pump the brakes on the capstone. We'll be diving more into that later. The stipend info is in there. That is similar to the capstone. The only thing I will say is you should have gotten an email from PEX, P-E-X, and that link expires after a couple days. So if you have not signed up for your online account, please do so. And if you didn't get the email, check your spam. Hi, Careers and Code? Yes. Come on in. You may want to grab a seat first. Okay. That stipend will be $100 that you get every month. As long as you are still academically eligible for that, your Visa debit cards will be showing up in the mail in the next week or two. They've all been ordered at this point. If you have any questions, let me know. You can activate the cards when you get them in the mail. They won't have any money on them until about a month from now, but you'll hear from Jason if you are not academically eligible. Otherwise, you'll get a message from him that money is available on the card. That money can be spent on anything. A lot of students will really benefit from having an external mouse, and certain ones will like an external keyboard as well. I will post recommendations if you are interested in that. That kind of gets your desk set up really well when you have your external monitor. But you can spend that on whatever you want, on groceries, on Ubers getting to class, on or getting down here to Common Space, whatever, wherever a Visa debit card is accepted in the US. Don't try and use it internationally, but other than that, that money is for you to spend. So we'll have more information coming for you in about a month on that. Mock interviews you don't need to worry about until around capstones as well. We'll have more details coming on that. And then finally, here is a link to a document we've put together for physical locations that you can tune in from class. There are a couple libraries open in Onondaga County, open until 9 p.m. and they're all listed there. So if you are someone who really likes to get out of the house, bring headphones with you. And other than that, these libraries have been great to work with. The other thing I will mention is if you don't have a library card, go get one. All you need is something with your address on it, like your driver's license. There is a LinkedIn Learning library that costs about $100 a month that the library provides for free. So it isn't a requirement for class, but it is a really, really awesome resource in addition to libraries just being great in general. Oh, you're fine. Co-working, I've linked to Common Space. That's where we're at, obviously. And then ShareCuse is just another one that we've worked with in the area. If you want to kind of check out co-working spaces, if you find that interesting. A couple coffee shops that we have worked with. Cafe Coupal has been an awesome sponsor, and they have several different locations. So if you're looking to get out of the house, that's a great option. Recess Coffee has been a really great partner of Hack Upstate, so that's another option. And then the Dunkin' in Liverpool, they have a community room there that you can call and reach out to them and book that. So if you're ever looking for like a study session and you don't want to do it here, you can do it at that Liverpool Dunkin' location. I'm pretty sure it's free to book, holds about 10 people, and that can be a great spot to kind of hold study sessions. Okay. That is everything in this module section of Canvas. Questions on any of that? Okay. Other thing that I want to show you guys is assignments. This is one of my biggest pet peeves of Canvas. Is by default it sorts by date, and that can make sense if you're a calendar-driven person, but it's really annoying because some of the assignments get mixed in, and some of these undated assignments will start slipping in up here, and it can get really annoying. So I recommend sorting by type, but that's totally my preference. You'll see at the top, there are your required projects. These are the homework assignments that get graded, and we use to figure out academic eligibility. So the due dates on there, I mentioned this at orientation, but the way the due dates work is shoot for getting it done by that date, even if you don't have the entire assignment done. However, the assignments don't lock out at that due date. So if you wake up Monday morning and you're like, oh crap, I forgot to do my homework, you can submit it. There is no penalty on late submissions. There is also no limit on resubmissions as well. So if you submit something Saturday, because you know you're going to be traveling Sunday, and you work on it a little bit more on Tuesday, you can always resubmit that assignment and we'll regrade that assignment and give you the points for it. So most of the assignments you'll be submitting right through Canvas. There are a couple of them that are Google Forms that you submit the form and then we'll go back and give you the credit for. But all of the due dates are in here. So a good example of one that lets you submit something. This was due this Monday. Here are two little links that we want you to read. All you need to do is click Start Assignment. It will say what's something that you've learned, and you can put your answer right in here. You come down, you hit Submit Assignment, and you're done. You're good to go. And then the other assignment that we want you to finish before you leave here tonight is this little form, right? And so if you guys have not filled this out, please fill it out now. All you got to do is check to submit your answer, give me your name, give me your phone number, and then are you interested in the membership? There's like 2 or 3 other questions once you hit the submit button here, and then you're done. You've completed your first or second assignment, and you are in the gradebook and off and running. All of that said, does anyone have questions about common space logistics or have any questions when they were filling out the form? As always, you can hit me up in Slack as things pop up. I almost always have my eye on Slack, both during class and during the workday. Don't feel bad about sending me any messages at like 3 in the morning. If you're a night owl, that's totally fine. Don't expect a response at 3 in the morning, but sending those messages are fine. I'm pretty good about snoozing my notifications, and you may be surprised that you may get an answer from me pretty late as well. So never hesitate to send a Slack message. It's not like a text message or a phone call where it's going to like wake me up or anything. So always feel free to reach out to me on Slack whenever questions pop up. Okay. In assignments, you will see a couple things in here. Required projects, if you're looking at this and you're like, wow, this is a really long list of things I have to do. Don't worry, this is pretty much every assignment that you've got to do over the next 6 months. So if you're someone who gets overwhelmed easily, I would recommend not looking at the assignments. If you are someone who loves to look ahead and is curious as to what we will be building, feel free to snoop in here. There are a couple of them that I have locked out because they are meant to be more of a surprise, more pop quiz, but don't panic. So there are a couple that you can't access. You'll see they say not available until, but that is all of your required assignments. There are also, and they will be sorted right again, if you have this sorted by type instead of date, you'll see that there are some optional assignments down here. So you can kind of think about this as extra credit. It's not quite as much extra credit points-wise as the assignments themselves. All of the required assignments are 5 points, except for the midterm project, which is 20. So these are all optional assignments. And these are all things that we have assigned in the past, but didn't want to overload you guys with homework, right? We're not big fans of homework for the sake of just giving homework. However, you may get to the end of this week and be like, all right, I kind of want to get an idea, what are we getting into next week, right? And that's when this pre-reading comes in handy. This pre-reading is just going to give you a couple links about HTML. You don't have to read all of these. You can kind of read through, see which ones are helpful. These are all resources that we've collected either from ourselves or from students in the past who have come in and said, hey, I'd like to get a little leg up before we start. What can I read? What resources can I go through? So we don't have pre-readings in here for every single week, but these are all kind of homework assignments that you can kind of test yourself and say, hey, am I really picking up what is getting put down in class, right? Can I push myself a little bit? Can I make sure I have understanding? So you will see if it has RP in the assignment, or quiz, that is something that you have to do for grading. If it doesn't, if it's listed under optional assignments or does not have RP in the title of it, again, for required project, These are more for your benefit. We do let you submit these, and when you submit them, we'll give you some feedback on it. We'll give you some extra credit points, but totally optional on these. Again, these are more for your benefit than our benefit. However, if you want to submit them, we will definitely notice and grade them and give you some extra points for that. Don't need to worry about the imported assignments. Laura will be coming back in, I believe next Monday, if not the Monday after that, to talk about career coaching, to give you a little rundown on the assignments, all of that good stuff. If you are getting overwhelmed, definitely sort out by assignments or by modules over here. Those will be the two most important features just to get you started in Canvas. And then as we progress, you'll find additional resources in here. Questions on any of that? Yeah.
Like you said, the credit just like it won't be as much credit towards our grade, but it's still going to be counted.
Correct. Yeah, it's only a point or two depending on how big the assignment is, compared to the required projects, which are 5 points each. The main three things that will factor into your grade are meeting with your mentor, classroom attendance, and then the required projects, and then the bonus extra credit will be the optional assignments. Any other questions? It's always due the Sunday after that that class. So you'll notice we use a lot of acronyms in the developer industry. RP, again, required project. You'll notice that all of our classes are dated with a date code. So you'll see W1, W2. This is week 2, meaning at the end of next week, this will be due. So April 28th, again, not this upcoming Sunday, but at the end of week 2. So Sunday of that week. And you'll also see that gets reused on our schedule. So if you are ever getting lost, you'll see that not only do we have everything dated here, so we're in week 1, day 1, but you'll see next Thursday it will be week 2, day 4, right? And if there is a holiday, we skip that. Well, we don't skip that day. So you'll see week 7, day 1. There won't be a YouTube video for week 7, day 1, but there will be for week 7, day 2. So just because we skip that day doesn't mean that we skip that date code, if that makes sense at all. But that is how, other than clicking on the YouTube link directly from the schedule, by the end of the cohort, there will be like 90 different videos on YouTube that are all 3 hours long. And you're going to be like, how do I find anything in this? That is all going to be based off of that date code. And as we start organizing our files starting next week, you will see my OCD come out in spades, because it is so easy to get lost on the code that we're incrementally building, right? We're going to have thousands of files by the end of this cohort. And so everything that we do, and including the students who are re-enrolled in this cohort, can attest to how important organization is. We use that date code system absolutely everywhere, so that you don't get lost in file duplicates. So again, week number and day number is really all it boils down to. D1 will always be Monday. D4 will always be Thursday. We do not have class on Fridays. You do get 3 full days off from me, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. All make sense? Some of this is common sense. Some of this is like, oh, I never would have found that if I didn't click on it. So we like to try and go over as much as we can. Okay, Common Space Tour we did. We will be doing professional headshots on Thursday in addition to the mentor meetup. Those are totally optional. You do not have to sit down. You don't have to have a headshot done. But we find a lot of students coming into this area, this profession, haven't had a professional headshot done in a while. So if you would like to dress up a little bit more on Thursday, you totally can. If you would like to skip that and you're like, I have a headshot, I'm totally fine, that's fine too. These are totally optional. We will remind you on Wednesday, so that you remember that's going on Thursday. But Karen, who is a graduate of the program and was our one of our program managers will come in with a green screen and get some professional DSLR shots of you and then share them with you after she takes them. So totally optional. One final reminder to activate your PEX card because that link in your email does expire. If you didn't get the email and you looked in your spam filter and you still can't find the email, come see me after class and I will figure out a way to resend it. But I just harp on that because the link does expire after a couple days. The good news is we have reviewed all links and assignments in Canvas. Like I said, feel free to explore Canvas as you go. If you've used anything like Google Classroom or Blackboard before, Canvas is just another alternative to that. And we really like Canvas over Google Classroom, which is, in my opinion, a nightmare. But anyway, all good there. Okay, I promise we're going to get more interactive after the Slack overview. So if you have not joined Slack yet, I don't know how you got in, but Slack, you can see I am a power Slack user. I am in all different kinds of channels over here and all kinds of direct messages over here. The only thing that you need to know is up at the top, there will be channels, right? The CIC C6 channel is open to the public, kind of. It's open to students, it's open to instructors, it's open towards mentors. This can be a great place to post a message of, hey, I just found this really great resource, or hey, does anyone want to meet up for a study group? You will get your Common Space memberships by the end of the week, so you'll be able to start using this space. But this can be a great opportunity to post resources, post questions, that kind of stuff. You will also see there is this CIC student C6 back channel. Once I get all of you guys in that by tomorrow, I will be out of there. So that is only for U20. As soon as I leave there, there's no way for me to see those messages. That can be a great place to post. Does anyone else get what he's saying? Can someone chime in and ask a question, please? That can be a great place to coordinate amongst yourselves. We find that once we open that channel, it often gets used more because we've created it. So that will be kind of your students only channel. I will post a message in there tomorrow. Hey, I've got all of you added. I'm out of here. Have fun. And I will not be able to see that channel between now and the end of time. So use that to your advantage. Just keep in mind that I'm not in there. So if you post a question and you're hoping to get a response from me, post it in the C6, don't post it in the back channel. The final thing that's really important is up at the top here, there is this new message button. If you click on that, you can see all of the people that I have access to messaging. So I can click on any one of them. My conversation history will pop up here, and you can send them a direct message. If you've used Discord, if you've used Facebook Messenger, all kind of the same idea here. And then all of the people you have direct message here will show up. The one thing I will warn you is these messages are only saved for 90 days because Slack is really expensive and we don't pay for it. So if you have anything that you would like to save over 90 days, copy and paste it into a Google Doc, save it somewhere because those things will disappear. But this can be a great way to either direct message me, direct message any of the other instructors. All of your mentors will be found in the direct messages as well, so you can message them directly. But Slack is our go-to messaging platform and will be used the entire cohort. If you can install it on your phone, we highly recommend it because that will be where I post, hey, running a couple minutes late if we're in person, or if you have any trouble getting into the building, Slack is going to be the best place to reach out to me, all of that kind of stuff. So use Slack to your advantage. This is used in the workforce as well, and really, really a great communication tool. And there are some fun things in here. So like if you go in, you can see that people have reacted to messages. That can be a great way to just let someone know that they saw your message or sympathize with someone, or little fun ways to get into emojis. You can also send code blocks. So once we start next week in code, I will show you how to highlight like I did the door code here. So there are kind of tips and tricks for using Slack that make it really beneficial. Okay. What else do I have? Slack overview we did. Time, date, and assignment. Week is for the WD is for day, A or RP for assignment. And then you have to absolutely have to be organized in this cohort, right? That just does not mean your files when you create them. That means all of your assignments, staying on top of them, being comfortable in Canvas. That means any additional resources. I know it sounds super old school, but some people benefit from printing things out. That is totally okay. I don't go anywhere without my spiral bound notebook, which is literally in my backpack right there. Don't think that just because you are a developer that you have to do everything digitally, right? So if you are someone who has been unorganized in the past, look at this as an opportunity to get yourself a little bit more organized in the future for the benefit of this cohort. And the last thing I will say is if you don't live your life out of a calendar, you're not going to make it in the professional world. I don't just mean doctor's appointments and remembering to show up for them. I mean, there is a 3-strike policy for all of our one-on-ones. So if you book 3 one-on-ones and don't show up to them, you lose access to them for an entire month, which is really tough because if you are missing one-on-ones, chances are you're the people who need them the most, right? So my time is just as valuable as your time. And you saw Calendly, right? You saw that you got to pick the time, that you get a text message reminder. There is no excuse. And there's even a cancellation link. So if you wake up the morning of and you're like, I can't make that, I'm not feeling great. I forgot that I double booked something. You go in, you click the cancel event button in the confirmation email. It cancels immediately. You don't have to message me. You don't have to feel guilty. Meeting is canceled. No big deal. So live your life out of a calendar. I'm not saying you need to schedule every minute of every day, but that is certainly something that has benefited people in the past. Try to be organized. If you are struggling with organization, if you are scheduling with time management, if you need help with any of that, that can be a great thing to talk to your mentor about or schedule with me. And I'm happy to give you tips and tricks on that as we go. I work 2 full-time jobs. I know what it's like to be disorganized. I also know the benefit of how great it is to go through your to-do list and have 19 things crossed off on it that you accomplished in that day. So if you have any questions about that, definitely feel free to ask me. Yes.
So, like you said, for canceling it, does it still count against you if you?
It does not. If you cancel within a couple minutes of the meeting, before the meeting, or the day before or whatever, it does not count as that 3-strike policy. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, not really a question, but can I get the Wi-Fi paddle?
You sure can. I am done lecturing at you. Now we get to be a little bit more interactive. So in a second, I'm going to pull up, we're going to do a brainstorming activity. So does anyone have a definition of what a tech stack is or what they think a tech stack is? Yeah.
The collection of technologies that you use to create a digital thing.
Mm-hmm.
Could you like VS Code
Mhm.
you use, or could you like a manual?
Yeah. So I think the most important part of what you said is it's a collection, right? So a tech stack is we take all of these individual puzzle pieces, but then how do we use them together, right? How do we literally stack them on top of each other? So there is an order for a tech stack. There are certain things that go together, but a lot of you guys are coming in here with no experience. A lot of you guys are coming in here where you've tried to get into the industry in the past. You've heard of these terms, but you've never really had a person to be like, well, I think this is what this is for, but I don't really know. Can you confirm that? And some of you are coming in here with previous experience, right? Where you've used some languages and you know how some of this fits together. But you may not necessarily have gotten all the way to the end because learning full stack web development is really hard to do in a silo. It's really hard when you get stuck and you don't have anyone to ask of, hey, I'm getting this error. I don't really understand it. I did everything. I'm followed along in the video. I'm doing everything in the textbook and I've just been stuck here. So when we do this exercise, I don't want you to feel awkward if when other people are throwing out these terms, you've never heard of them. That's okay. But what we're going to do is we're going to do just a little brainstorm of kind of any technical tools or languages that you may have heard of. You don't have to define them. You don't have to say how they work together. You don't even have to know what it's for. But let's start. What are some languages, frameworks, tools, things that you've heard in the development space where you're like, that's a name that I've heard of? Yeah.
Visual Studio.
Visual Studio. jQuery. Python. C#.
SQL.
SQL. JavaScript. Hotmail.
HTML.
Black.
Slack.
CSS.
CSS.
Yeah.
React. Axios. Sure.
Someone said maybe.
MongoDB. Mongo.
Google Docs.
Google Docs.
Linux.
Linux.
Snowflake.
Snowflake. AWS or something different. C++.
AWS.
Sure. Sure.
For Microsoft.
.NET. Azure.
That one and there's another. Power BI.
Mhm. Terminal. Yeah. GitHub.
Anaconda.
Sure.
PowerShell.
Mm-hmm.
That's for resources like MDM.
Mm-hmm.
Tableau.
Wireframe. Yeah. Great one. One of my favorites. Mm-hmm. Sure is. You only make the mistake of thinking Java and JavaScript are the same thing once. Totally different languages.
So which one came first, Java?
Yes. Not by much though, but yeah, Java was technically first. JavaScript was written by one guy in a week. Yeah, one of the original founders of Firefox, actually, Mozilla.
Oh,
Mm.
Mozilla.
Mhm.
That would have- Yeah.
One of my least favorites.
Oh, what about Python?
What?
Python.
Spell it?
Take away the P, is out of C.
Okay.
Although outdated, Ruby.
Mm-hmm. Not as outdated as you might think. It's also Ruby on Rails. Yep. Mhm. It's quite all right.
Jupyter notebooks?
Yep. Is it with a Y?
Oh, yes, with a Y, yeah. Oh, Jupyter, yeah.
Mhm. No.
Postgres?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's big.
Oh.
Big one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Was it GitHub already?
Yep, we got that.
GitHub desktop.
Ooh, we don't have that. And those are all three separate things that we will be learning.
Full train.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't have good old C. Yeah.
Show basic in there?
I don't think so. What?
Visual.
Committee?
Community.
Community.
Back over.
Sure.
Just that, towards that.
Yeah, sure. Pretty good list. Anything else? Last minutes?
What's the longest list you had?
I think 70.
Bro.
Sure.
Football. Let's go. Earl.
Here.
Let's go, like.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Oh.
Assembly.
Mm-hmm. TensorFlow, I heard. Where's-
Thank you.
GODTRAUGHT? Mm-hmm. Close. Mm-hmm.
Put those in there.
Don't use curse words in this room. I think we got Power BI.
Decimal. Really, we're the ASCII. Arduino.
Mm-hmm.
ROS.
ROSS?
But they're all tabs. It's a robotics operating system.
Fine.
MATLAB? I think you've crossed it. Wireshark? Mm-hmm.
Better logic. Better logic.
Flash is another curse word. We do not use that in just kidding. All right. So the good news is, and there are always a couple that catch me, I think I can confidently say I know 95% of these. Not know as in I use them every single day, but I can tell you what these are, why, for one reason. These all fall into categories, right? So if we can understand where these categories fall, we can start understanding a stack better. So let's start going through these, and you're going to see kind of as we go how these categories start falling into place. And once we can categorize something, we can understand it a little bit better, right? Because OpenHack, which is going to be happening right on this other side of the wall in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, there are going to be a ton of other developers there. And you're going to say, hey, what languages do you know? What do you do at your job? And they're going to come back and they're going to say, oh, I use Django. Like, what's Django? I've never heard of Django, right? So you're going to go, oh, well, what category is Django? What kind of tool is that, right? Because there are so many different kinds of developers. They're not just web developers, they're desktop developers, they're cloud engineers. There's a whole range of jobs that we'll talk about in a second, that it's impossible to know everything on this list, right? And you're going to, at some point, if you haven't experienced it already, have what we call shiny eye syndrome, right? Where you just see a new programming language, a new tool, a new thing to learn, and you go, ooh, shiny, right? And you go and you want to learn that. And because you're learning that, you get distracted on the other thing that you're learning, and you're going to drift down that path, right? And especially when you're not learning in a classroom environment like the boot camp, it's really easy to get lost and to get frustrated and go, I'm stuck here, but I heard that I can also accomplish this with this other thing. So I'm going to go jump ship. I'm going to go try that instead because I'm not stuck on getting started over there. We want to avoid that as much as possible, right? We want to get you through 6 months of our program with a very prescribed tech stack of these are the things that we're going to teach you. Because by the time you get to the end of it, here's the devastating news. You're probably not going to get a job in our tech stack. You may get a job that's using JavaScript in the front end, but uses PHP in the back end. That's okay. Everything that you learn here is going to be transferable to almost any other language on this list. And that's the really cool thing. But what we encourage you to do is put on your horse blinders, right? Focus in just on that tech stack that we are teaching, because once you have, I don't want to say mastery of it, but once you're feeling pretty comfortable with that, you're going to be able to go to any other language on this list that's in the same category and go, oh, I learned JavaScript. That means that I can also probably accomplish this in this other programming language. So just because we teach a particular stack doesn't mean that you have to absolutely get the perfect job using that, but it does mean that once you get confident using those skills, you'll find that it's kind of more translatable, right? So when we think about another language, we think about learning French, right? Or Chinese or whatever language, that's a huge commitment, right? That's going to take you 6 months, a year, however long, right? But I don't really like to think about programming languages as different languages. I like to think about them more as different dialects, right? So think about it more of American English versus British English. They're not going to call it the hood and the trunk. They're going to call it the bonnet and the, whatever. So there are little differences, but for the most part, I can go up to a British person and talk to them, even though they're a different programming language, more of a different dialect, right? And we have that all across our country, right? Think Southern versus Northern versus West Coast, right? All different ways of talking, different things, different terminology that we use. But at the end of the day, we can kind of understand it. And what you'll find is by the time you get to the end of this program, you'll be able to pick up Python or Ruby or any other language and be like, oh, that's not the syntax that we use. That's not the grammar, right? And we may call that thing something a little different, but at the end of the day, there are going to be 15 to 20 core concepts that we learn in JavaScript that apply to any other programming scripting language. So to go through these, I'm going to start kind of categorizing them. And if you know them as something different, feel free to shout out or weigh in, just like you did for the brainstorming exercise. What I want you guys to understand, the goal of class is for me to talk the least. I want to hear from you guys. I want to get you interactive. I want to hear you guys weighing in, right? That is going to be even more important when we get into Zoom. Don't hesitate to come off mute and be like, Max, you're being an idiot. I need you to repeat that. Or can you say that a different way, right? I want you guys to be interactive. If you're a little bit more timid, you can always drop a note in either Slack or the Zoom chat and I will see it. But hands down, the best way for you guys to be learning is going to be coming off mute and asking those questions as we go, right? And if you're one of those timid people, that's okay. But the best way to learn is to give feedback to me and ask questions. So let's go through these. I will admit when I don't know what one of them is, and I will lean on you guys for that experience. You will see I have a Max had to Google section up there. I am not the end all be all. I do not know everything. I've been a professional developer for about 15 years, but I figured hearing my bio is something that you expect from day one. So I'm going to sneak that up on you guys. One of these classes, I'll give you my background. But for now, let's start going through these and start thinking through them. The good news is we have a break coming up in 20 minutes, and I will make sure everyone gets a chance to use that break, and we'll break until 7:25. So I will take that on as a challenge. Let's see how many of these we can get through by that time. Okay, Visual Studio. Visual Studio is a dev tool. Visual Studio, you got to be a little careful with because there's Visual Studio and VS Code. Same company, two entirely separate tools. So we will be using VS Code, which also comes from Microsoft. Visual Studio is something that they may have changed the licensing on this recently, but as far as I know, you need to license Visual Studio, and that tends to be a very expensive license, costing of upwards of $1,000 a year. So Visual Studio is a purpose-built tool from Microsoft, usually used to write C# and .NET, although it does support other programming languages. But what do we mean by a dev tool? We just mean a tool that developers use to write their code or debug their code or to use for infrastructure. So you'll see that there are other things on this list that fall into that category. jQuery. About 10 years ago, this was by far the most popular framework used anywhere all across the web. Why did we use jQuery? Because JavaScript sucked. There were certain things that should have been built into JavaScript, and they just weren't. And so it used to be that if you were starting a new website that you were going to be writing some JavaScript for, the first thing you did was install jQuery, because jQuery were just shortcuts to make JavaScript easier to write. We call that a framework. Now, a framework is anything where we could do it ourselves, but the framework just makes it a little bit easier to do it. However, frameworks are written in certain languages themselves. And so that also falls into web and JavaScript, because we use jQuery in the browser, but we write jQuery code using JavaScript.
Are frameworks synonymous with libraries? Right? How many times like they're all libraries, frameworks, and not all frameworks, libraries?
It's a really good question. And that it tends to be more important when you're doing mobile dev over web dev. I don't want to say they're technically synonymous, but the Venn diagram overlap is pretty strong there. So libraries tend to be used more for, I want to say, like heavier requirements. So like if you needed to take a picture on a phone, you would use the camera library, more foundational, closer to the hardware. You will sometimes see them be used interchangeably. React was really weird at the beginning. I don't know if they still are. They're like, we're not a framework, we're a library. But that kind of gets into the weeds a little bit. For now, it's totally fine to think about frameworks and libraries as accomplishing the same thing, which is giving you pre-built functionality that you can use in your own app. Python. Python is a language. It can be used both to create desktop applications. What do we mean by desktop applications? We mean the icons down in on your Mac. They can be used for data analysis, but it can also be used as a web server, right? And a lot of people will write web servers in Python. What do we mean by web server? We mean either something that can serve up some HTML, or we mean something that's hosting an API, an application programming interface. So the way our curriculum is set up is that we learn to use APIs first. We will be using the New York Times API to retrieve bestsellers. That's your midterm assignment. We use APIs to retrieve the weather. We use APIs to retrieve random Owen Wilson clips of him saying, wow. Yes, the projects get a little weird, but we get creative. And so Python is commonly used to create APIs and to run a web server. There are other things Python can certainly be used for. Data analysis is one of them. Python, if we weren't teaching JavaScript, Python would be what we're learning. It's probably the most common language that people learn after graduation. Really powerful, and the syntax is a little bit easier to learn and understand than Python. The only reason we don't teach Python, and some boot camps certainly do, is because JavaScript can be used everywhere. We can write JavaScript and have it run in the web browser. We can write JavaScript on the server. We call that Node.js. We can write JavaScript that builds mobile apps for us. JavaScript is somewhat like music, right? It's kind of the universal language. You can kind of use it everywhere. That doesn't mean everyone loves it, and certainly there are other languages that are used, but the reason we teach JavaScript is because once you understand that syntax for getting things to work in the web browser, that syntax can also be used on the server, and if you want to, even in something like React Native down the road, to build mobile apps. And we'll also learn React, which is another framework used for in the browser using JavaScript. Okay, C#, another language primarily used for web servers for building APIs. It can also be used for building desktop applications. It is a Microsoft language, proprietary to them. Anytime you hear C, you know that it is a derivative of that. So C# is actually a derivative of C itself. C++ is another very popular variant. SQL, it is technically a language, but it falls more into databases. And it is a language, I will give you that, but SQL stands for Structured or Standardized Query Language. I've heard both. No one can agree, but it is how we can write a query to either do what we call the for CRUD operation, CRUD, create, read, update, delete. We use that SQL language to do that. So we will be learning SQL when we get into the databases. About 2/3 of the way into the program, we'll be learning SQL, and then we'll also learn how we can interact with our databases, still using SQL, but using JavaScript instead of the SQL language itself. So databases are really fun. JavaScript, it is definitely a language. It is primarily used on the web. It can also be used in the web server, for mobile. It is the language that you will absolutely hate, because you'll be going through HTML and CSS. You'll be like, I'm getting this. I don't know why they said the boot camp was going to be so hard. You're going to get to JavaScript and it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks. The good news is it's one of our longest modules. We have 4 weeks to go through it. But JavaScript requires a different way of thinking. HTML, you can kind of think visually through the HTML, and that carries a lot of people through the syntax. When you get to JavaScript, the syntax is just a little tricky. And so you can kind of get it all working and still not understand the JavaScript behind it. So JavaScript, definitely important to understand HTML, but when you get to the JavaScript, make sure that you understand it, not just get it working. Go that extra level, right? They say the true level of mastery is see one, do one, teach one, right? So you're going to see me do it, and then I'm going to take a break, and you're going to have 15 minutes, all starting on Monday, to do it yourself and try and get it working. And so that's your do one. But then you're also going to have a teach one, right? Which is, hey, if I showed this to someone else, could I explain to them what this code is doing, right? I'm not necessarily going to go over every little syntax piece, but what is this code doing? How could I tell someone else this is how to write the code to do it, right? And there will also be homework assignments where you don't have to write a line of code. All you need to do is go through my code and put in an explanation on every line of what is this line doing. The other exercise that we do is go through and number the code, because even though we read code from top to the bottom, there are multiple files that we'll write to, and there are also different order. The order that we write the code might not be the order that the code is actually going to go out and run as we get into more complex apps. So that can be a really great exercise as well, of going through, God forbid you print your code Yeah, I actually did that on Thursday last week, and went in with a pen and just started writing on the actual paper to make sure that I was capturing everything that I was trying to do. Okay, Hotmail, communication tool, used for email, Gmail, Outlook, all kind of in that same sphere. We can technically put that under cloud, which we're going to use in a second. That is a little bit of a stretch, but Hotmail is email server. HTML language stands for hypertext markup language. It is primarily used, well, pretty much solely used for building websites. We use HTML to structure our content, and then we use CSS, which is another language, stands for cascading style sheets, to style it. So our first trifecta that we'll be learning is HTML to structure the content, CSS to style the content, to lay it out, to get pretty colors working, and then JavaScript to make it all interactive. Okay, what happens when they click on this thing? Or we build a little tic-tac-toe game. We make something so you click a button in the number increments, right? The very basics. But HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are going to be our first three main programming languages. Slack, just a communication tool. We use that. React, we're going good here on web. React is written in JavaScript, and it is primarily a framework, or they may argue that it's a library. Okay to use them synonymously. Axios is another framework. It is for making API calls in the web, and it is also written using JavaScript. And we write JavaScript to interact with Axios. We don't teach Axios anymore. It used to be part of our curriculum. Why don't we teach Axios? Because Axios is going the way of jQuery just about 5 years later. So why don't people use jQuery anymore? Because React and Angular and Vue are three more popular frameworks. They're a little bit newer. They're a little bit more powerful. They're a little bit better for building web apps over websites. Same for Axios. Axios is dying out like jQuery is because almost all the features of jQuery are now built into JavaScript itself. So cohort 1, back in 2019, we were still teaching jQuery. We were still teaching Axios. Now in 2024, JavaScript's gotten a lot better. We've got newer versions of JavaScript. We get newer versions of Fetch, which is built into JavaScript. And Axios just isn't as required anymore because it's easier to do it in what we call vanilla JavaScript, right? JavaScript without any framework. So that's why we don't teach that anymore. It is a fine tool to use, though. If you know it, it is a great tool, especially for APIs. Okay. See if I can pick up some speed here. Unix is an operating system. It was one of the first operating systems. Linux was an evolution of Unix. The operating system provides all kinds of things for us, like memory management, keeping track of the time, storage management for writing things to the hard drive. And for us developers, it provides us a terminal or a command prompt or a bash or a shell. Not all synonymous, but all that kind of idea of what happens. How do we tell the computer we want to do something? And of course, Unix doesn't usually have a user interface, a UI, or what we call a GUI, a graphical user interface. But most operating systems that are not running servers do have user interfaces today, right? So the top bar that we have at the top where I can click on Apple, where I can go down to the bottom, the fact that I can move my mouse around the screen, the fact that there is Finder or My Computer where we can interact with things, those are all usually provided by the operating system. The only time that we don't have a user interface is when we're accessing a web server, because the web server is all about doing things at scale. It's not necessarily about ease of use. So there are times that we have to interact with the terminal. We will start doing that about a third of the way into the program once we start working our way into JavaScript. So you won't be terminal experts by the end of this course, but you hopefully won't be afraid of it, which is probably where some of you guys are at now. That's totally fine. MongoDB is the first database we have run into. There are two types of databases, SQL databases, and then as developers, never let a developer name anything. The only kind of other type of database is called a NoSQL database. Mongo is the hands down the most popular NoSQL database. It is open source. If you guys haven't heard of open source yet, that's totally fine. Open source just means that people work on it for free and also make all of the code that powers that tool also available for free. So we'll be learning more about open source as we get in to Git and GitHub and GitHub Desktop. Red Hat is a huge provider of open source software. And Jay Balunas is a developer in the community who will hopefully be at OpenHack next session. He'll also come in and give a talk about open source and how that whole community runs, how licensing works, how you can get involved, all of that fun stuff. But MongoDB, at the end of the day, it's used as a database. It can be used to interact with a website, a web app, even an API. But that is certainly a stretch. It is 99% database. It just happens to be used building web apps and APIs. So I'll list them. Google Docs, dev tool, communication, right? We use Google Docs all over this cohort. We use that instead of Microsoft Word or Pages, which is a free application that comes on all of your Macs from Apple. Google Docs is widely used in the developer community because of the collaboration on it. You don't need to send files around. I'll also put it under cloud because it's not anything that you need to download. It does run in the cloud. That also means it's for web, but anyway. Linux is an operating system just like Unix. Mac OS is built on Linux. It is not directly tied to the Linux project anymore, but that's where Mac OS got its start about 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago. Snowflake, we meant AWS Snowflake, right? Different Snowflake.
Whatever the database Snowflake is.
Yeah. Database, and it is a cloud specific version of working with databases. I'm pretty sure it's AWS, right? Snowflake is different clouds have different names for their products. The three biggest and major clouds are AWS, which stands for Amazon Web Services. Basically, Amazon 15 years ago realized that they had really great infrastructure for making Amazon.com run. And so they were like, well, we've invested so much in this infrastructure. Why don't we open it up to other companies? And so they created Amazon Web Services. Well, Google looked at Amazon Web Services 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and they went, oh, that's not worth a lot of money. We can catch up to them whenever we decide to. Well, they fell asleep at the wheel. And when they did decide to do that, they launched Google Cloud Platform, and they realized that AWS actually was way ahead of Google because of all of the containerization, basically meaning that you can split up a server and have a lot of different people using it. So we no longer teach AWS because AWS is a pain to set up and even harder to cancel and get them to stop billing you. So we use something called fly.io. You'll be learning from Nathan on how to deploy your applications. That is all in DevOps. But AWS is the biggest cloud, followed by Azure or Azure, depending on who you ask. Google Cloud Platform is the third biggest, and then IBM Bluemix is number 4. C++ is a language. It is primarily used to make desktop applications. C++ is also known as one of the fastest programming languages. That means that it's really great for algorithms. Google uses C++ under the hood to make all of its searches run in a really quick period. So yeah, C++, a little bit harder of a language to learn, a little bit more computer science-y, but is a really, really fast language. Bootstrap is a framework. It is a CSS and HTML framework. Technically uses a little bit of JavaScript, but primarily CSS and HTML. And that means that it's all used for the web. Azure, I just talked about, that is web. Power BI, I'm gonna put this as a developer tool first and a language second. Power BI is used kind of for automations. It's kind of I don't mean to insult any of its users, but it's for people who want to not be a full on developer, but also want to get something accomplished really quickly. So it's a little bit easier to learn. It is really powerful. Another Windows invention, Microsoft invention, but it is basically for people who want their spreadsheets to be more powerful, but don't necessarily want to become a full out developer. Anyone disagree with that? I don't mean to be insulting by
I
that.
gotta use it for work on. Too. I think that's an apt description.
Yeah, I think they refer to it as like low coding.
Yes, low code, no code, definitely gotten more popular as computer users are hitting the limits of what an application can do. Terminal. I'm going to call this a dev tool. It used to be the only way to interact with the computer. Now, most people are afraid of the terminal. Terminal and command prompt, kind of synonymous, just different operating systems. It is 7 o'clock. I am a man of my word. I will not hold you guys. So we will be back at 7:25. Pavone's is right next door if you would like to get pizza. The convenience store is right on the other side if you want to stop there. You are welcome to bring in food. There's a toaster oven and a microwave here for the other classes. Help yourself to water or whatever. We'll be back at 7:25. We'll finish going through this, and then we will wrap up with puzzle piecing the stack together and getting our application set up. Any questions? Feel free to come up with me, hang out. Otherwise, we'll see you in 20 minutes. Because everything is kind of pre-built into it. At work, I use an IDE. I use an IDE called WebStorm. I love it because all of the tools are in there. However, I find it super overwhelming for beginners, so we start with VS Code. When people graduate the program, they tend to look into IDEs and figure out if it's worth it for them. And a lot of senior professional developers I know say, I don't want to use an IDE. I like VS Code. I'm going to keep using that. There's nothing wrong with it. Those are kind of the middle and the heavy end of the spectrum. On the light end of the spectrum are people who insist on writing all of their code in Nano or Vim, which are two text-based editors. I think they are personally insane, but you will find out that people are very opinionated in the development space. And so we won't be spending a ton of time in Nano and Vim because they are terminal-based, basically meaning you can't use your mouse at all in them. But lots of different tools out there, and most IDEs and some text editors like VS Code are language specific. VS Code is not language specific. We can do HTML, CSS, Python, JavaScript, pretty much any language in VS Code. It's one of the more popular ones, but IDE is integrated development environment, meaning text editor and all the tools around that language for making it easier to use. PowerShell is a dev tool. It is kind of a language, but most importantly, it is a terminal for interacting with the OS. PowerShell kind of was born out of command prompt not being as powerful as end users wanted it to be. And so Microsoft came out and created this thing called PowerShell because they were quaking in Linux's boots of how great Bash scripting actually was. So we won't be touching PowerShell. We won't be touching a ton of Bash scripting, but we will be getting into the terminal and learning that. MDN is a Mozilla Developer Network. It is the go-to Bible, so to speak, of all HTML and CSS, and arguably JavaScript. I'm going to put that under documentation. I guess it's also a dev tool. They have branched out, especially W3 schools, into other languages like PHP, but for the most part, it is documentation. Which you will be using extensively as developers. There are still things that I look up every single day because I can't remember how to do them. There are so many things to remember. Do not hesitate to look them up. Tableau is less of a dev tool and more of a data visualization tool. Tableau is kind of interesting because oftentimes you need to do data manipulation, and the way you do data manipulation is through a programming language like R, which we're about to get to. But Tableau does all kinds of really cool data visualizations and is something that, while we won't cover directly in the boot camp, it's something that is a easy evolution after you graduate to learn if you're interested. It tends to, I think, also be on the pricey side if you're using it for commercialization, but it's often something that your employer will end up paying for you. So not exactly in the development space, but kind of related adjacently to it. Wireframe is the first concept that we've run into on this list. You may have also heard of mockups and prototypes. Those are all three related. We will be learning about them starting tomorrow, actually. That is the main point of tomorrow's class. So we're going to learn about requirements gathering, wireframing, which is basically, I know everything my app needs to do. How do I visually get it to do that? And so wireframing is my favorite way, is going to a whiteboard and drawing rectangles on there and starting to go from there. There are a ton of tools like Figma for wireframing mockups and prototypes, but we'll be diving more into that tomorrow. Node.js is a language. It is a web server, and shocker, it is also written in JavaScript. So Node.js is the language we'll be using to build our own APIs. It is very powerful. It is somewhat newer. It's been around for about 10 years, but gotten really popular in the past 5 years. Google is one of the main supporters of it. And we'll be learning that about 2/3 of the way into the program. Java, another programming language. It's primarily used for either desktop apps or for server side. It is one of the oldest programming languages. It has a ton of technical debt around it, meaning it's a little bit more challenging to use and set up. However, it is very enterprise friendly. So if you're working in a big company, chances are they will have some Java tools that have been around for a while. A lot of companies are trying to move off Java because it is such a big behemoth older language, but it is still actively updated. It's owned by Oracle, and all of the Android operating system for the longest time was built using Java. They're now moving away from that to Kotlin, which is a newer evolution of Java, just like C++ is an evolution of C. We do see evolutions of languages, but Java, the most important thing to know about that, Java and JavaScript are not the same thing. If you mix that up in front of someone technical, they will make fun of you for it. They'll call you out on it. But Java, JavaScript, not quite the same thing. Java is easily in the top 10 programming languages of all time, just like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Python, PHP, Ruby. Off the top of my head, I don't know the exact order of that, but those are all very popular programming languages, sometimes used for different things. For example, you'll see Ruby on Rails, and which we'll get to in a second, is used a lot more for web development compared to Java, which may be used for more desktop-based applications. But there is a lot of flexibility in a language and what it's used for. TypeScript is a language that is an evolution of JavaScript. We have gone back and forth over the past 3 cohorts of whether or not we should be teaching TypeScript or not. It is an evolution of JavaScript. However, it is you can write plain vanilla JavaScript in all TypeScript. TypeScript just adds additional functionality onto JavaScript. The only reason we don't teach TypeScript is it adds additional syntax, and we found that students struggle with JavaScript syntax on its own. So to add on top of that before you've mastered JavaScript doesn't outweigh the benefits of what you get from TypeScript. Python I am not familiar with, so that's going to get an X, and Max has to Google. I'm guessing it is an evolution of Python and C. Interesting. So that's definitely going to be a language. And I'm just going to say C and Python. Anyone can invent a programming language. It doesn't necessarily mean that you should be using it. So keep in mind shiny eye syndrome of like, hey, should I be learning this? What is it like? Let me make sure I understand it and why a mentor or another developer might be using it. Always ask questions. No matter how dumb you think they are, it is so important to do. Okay, Ruby is a language. It is used primarily for web server. It can also be used for desktop. And then you will find that there are a lot of frameworks that are specific for languages. So just like we use React for JavaScript, or we use Express for Node, or we use Rails for Ruby, or we use Django for Python, there's always a relationship, right? The framework is always built in a language or is meant to enhance a language. And so whenever you hear a framework, you always want to tie that to, but what language is that framework in? Ruby on Rails is very easy because both of them are in the name. But for the most part, just understand there is a relationship between frameworks. Ruby on Rails is only used on well, almost always used for a web server making an API or a full stack web application. PHP is a language. It used to stand for personal homepage. It is now an acronym that contains its own acronym, which is really weird. If you're a linguistic person, you can look into it. But anyway, it's a web server server-side programming language, runs about 70% of all sites on the internet. That may sound like a huge number, and that's because it powers WordPress. WordPress is a content management system. We have had students go on to learn PHP. PHP was actually my first server-side programming language. It gets a lot of crap in the community, but I don't think it's totally deserved. R is a language. It is a Python-related language. It is used for data analysis, can also be run on the cloud for data analysis, but R is kind of like a, I don't want to call it quite a framework, but it's kind of related to Python for data analysis, cleaning data, all kinds of mathematical things that you can do with R. What's the pirate's favorite programming language?
R.
You think it would be R, but it's really the C. Okay. Swift, another programming language. The first one that we are getting to that is used for mobile apps. Swift was invented by Apple a little less than 10 years ago, somewhere around 10 years ago. It is now largely replacing Objective-C, which is objectively a terrible programming language, and Apple finally realized that and came out with Swift about 10 years ago. Jupyter Notebook is a dev tool, also an IDE, primarily for Python, correct? So it is, like I said, IDEs are normally specialized on the programming language. Go, another programming language primarily used for web servers, can also be used for generic scripting and for data analysis. Go was invented by a Google engineer, if I'm not incorrect there, and it was meant to make C a little bit more flexible, but also more easier to interact with. Postgres is another database. It is SQL based, just like MySQL is. Different companies have made applications for databases. Postgres and MySQL, obviously both SQL based, both open sourced, both very popular. We will be learning Postgres in this course. However, any SQL variant can easily be learned once you have mastery of Postgres. Figma is technically a dev tool. It is more used for design. We often think as developers, the best place to start is in our code. That is not the case. And what we'll be learning tomorrow is where do we start, not even in design, but in requirements, thinking through what this application needs to do, and then how do we design a user interface for it? Because once we have the design becomes much easier to implement in our code. Spring. Is this Java Spring or a different Spring? Java Spring. Okay, so Java Spring is primarily used. I want to say it's more of a framework for UI. Is that correct? Yeah, okay. So instead of building our site in HTML, if we wanted to build a desktop class application, we would use Java Spring, which makes it a little bit easier to lay things out using pixels and components. That is actually how I started building my first UIs, and then I learned HTML and questioned why anyone would want to do it the Java Spring way. However, that's the way it was done for 20 years. So we won't be learning Java or Java Spring, but it is an evolution of Java and creating applications in it. GitHub Desktop is a dev tool. It is also kind of interestingly a user interface to make it easier for us to interact with Git directly without having to issue terminal commands. And the same goes for Git. However, that's typically accessed more in the terminal, and the UI is what is accessing Git under the hood. Fortran is another programming language. It is an ancient programming language that is very rarely used for any new applications today. If you would like the crap scared out of you, it is also what the entire air traffic control network is still running on to this day. So it is a very powerful language. It is a very fast language. No one knows it. And so if you are looking to make a buttload of money after graduation, go learn Fortran or the IBM mainframe language, which I am blanking on right now. National Grid is hiring people left and right who understand mainframes because they need people to help them move off it. But to move off it, they have to understand it first to understand what they are moving. So Fortran, old, no one is learning that as their first language, but still widely used. Pascal, another language. I'm going to put desktop on this. This was before mobile or web or any of those existed, so I can't really classify that. Language for C. Primarily used for desktop, can also be used for web servers. C is a very low level language, but when you need to optimize your memory storage and all that kind of stuff, you use C instead of C++. Most people jump right to C++ these days, but C still is around. Chat GPT is a oh,
That's cool.
I really
It's a single application, is it not?
it is technically an LLM, a large language model, or a learning language model. I'm gonna put down tool here. We will be using ChatGPT throughout the cohort. I don't want you to think that we are anti-ChatGPT. What we are anti-ChatGPT for is understanding, because we were doing all of these quizzes in Canvas, which you would do weekly, and I realized that you could copy every question into ChatGPT and get the correct answer every time. And so I went, well, why are we doing quizzes now? What you have to be careful with ChatGPT is that ChatGPT is 100% confident and not 100% correct. And so it will tell you an incorrect answer and have no idea it's incorrect. And because of that, it will confidently tell you that that is the answer, even though it is wrong. So ChatGPT is revolutionizing our industry. It is replacing junior devs. It is not replacing senior devs. And so why am I learning web development if I can just do everything in ChatGPT? Because you have to understand what to ask ChatGPT. You have to understand how to modify the ChatGPT answers to continue building something bigger. You have to understand user requirements and communication working in a team to understand what needs to be built. And finally, ChatGPT doesn't have the context of what you're building in, right? You're not going to start from scratch every single time. There's usually an application that you are adding a feature into when you're working in a workplace. You're not going to be starting from scratch. And if you have to, ChatGPT is not replacing senior developers. So you still need a workforce of junior developers to work their way up to senior developers. So ChatGPT is something that definitely can be scary. My full-time job is building a content management system for communication content, right? And so I am very familiar with ChatGPT. I have made integrations with ChatGPT. I do not want you to think ChatGPT is the devil, but I do want you to be careful when you are using it. A great way to use it is to paste code in, a line of code in, and say, please explain this code to me like I'm 5. And it does a great job of doing that. What I want you to be careful of is using it to get an answer, pasting it in, seeing that it does what you want, and moving on, right? Because whether I'm teaching it or whether you're getting it from ChatGPT, wherever you're getting it from, understanding is so, so important in this. And if you look at a line of code and say, I can't describe it, ChatGPT made it and I just went with it, that's what to be careful with there. So sorry for going down a rabbit hole on that. Just a warning on ChatGPT. It can be a great tool, but it is a naive tool and a new tool. So be careful with it. But I don't want to completely rule it out. And you'll see as we go, you'll see me using ChatGPT to get answers, to describe things, to see what it's really good at and what it's really bad at. So we're working on updating our curriculum to include more of that. Visual Basic, another dev tool. It is an IDE. It is primarily used for Microsoft languages, .NET and C, or C#. Visual Community, I believe, is the community around Visual Basic. So this is an online community, so we'll call that a dev tool, just like Stack Overflow is. Is it?
Yeah, so it's kind of like VS Code, but it's a very
Oh, okay. I did not know that. So I'm gonna give that credit for something I had to look more into. Stack Overflow is kind of like Quora for developers specifically. Sometimes you get an answer that has 1,000 upvotes. So think Quora meets Reddit almost. And it is a very probably top 3 most visited websites by developers Very, very popular website. You are either going to get an answer that is magical and you don't understand why it took you why it was so quick to find it, or you're going to get an answer that makes absolutely no sense to you and everyone's going to be arguing about it and there are going to be 9 answers and all of them are going to be conflicting on each other. So as you progress out of entry-level development and into junior and senior level development, Stack Overflow is a great tool for debugging your code, understanding error messages, all of that kind of stuff. Certainly not steering you away from it, but always look into how many upvotes the answer has and keep in mind that there are many ways to, I hate the phrase skin a cat, but many ways to solve a problem, and Stack Overflow may show you one too many of those ways. MERN stack is, I'm going to just say a concept. It is, MERN stands for Mongo, Express, React, and Node. Those are 4 pieces of technology that work together in a stack, which we're going to go over as the last thing we cover tonight. It is technically web dev. It is technically 2-ish different languages. Kind of hard to define that in MERN in particular, because they all use a variation of JavaScript. But lots of different stacks. And they tend to all be acronyms. So when you hear people talking about a stack, never be afraid to say, what does MERN stand for? And when they break it down for you, it can be easier to understand what is actually going into that stack. Trello is a dev tool. It is primarily for project management. We will be covering Trello. Other popular project management tools include Jira, Jira, Asana, yes. Confluence is more of a wiki tool than it is Jira is closer to project management than Confluence is. But Confluence, Trello, and Jira are all owned by Atlassian. So who also owns Bitbucket, who is the biggest competitor to GitHub. So you will learn about these big companies that focus on developers. So project management is more accurate than DevTool, but when you're working on a team, Trello can be really helpful, but Trello can also be really helpful when we get into your capstone of having so many different things that you want to work on. We'll be using Trello to help organize your thoughts. Not a requirement, but definitely something that helps. Okay, Cobalt, another language, not as old as Fortran, but getting up there. And same for Perl, which is even newer than Cobalt. People still write in Perl, not as much anymore. All the older languages are really good at running code at scale, but that code tends to be harder to write because there are less frameworks and concepts built into it because they're older, because they haven't had the time to mature and have those things built into it. SQLite is a database. Just like the name implies, it is the light version of SQL. So it is not as powerful as Postgres or MySQL or Oracle SQL or any of those variants. But for small files and easily getting set up, there's a benefit to it. We won't be using SQLite because we'll be teaching Postgres, which is a little bit more flexible and runs on a server better. But SQLite is a great database when you need a database in a single file that isn't necessarily scaling across the cloud or server. API is a concept, application programming interface. This is how we get our programs to talk to other programs. It is something that we will be spending multiple weeks on. APIs are basically how the whole internet works or how applications talk to each other. Google Cloud is another cloud. Just like AWS or Azure, just Google instead of Microsoft and Amazon. DevOps, another concept. We realized about 10 years ago that the cloud was getting really complicated and we needed people that were not just developers and not just IT people to help us get our applications onto the internet. We do spend 2 weeks on DevOps, week 5 and week 18-ish off the top of my head. So you will be learning DevOps to deploy your applications to get them out on the internet. It is not a requirement that you do that for graduation, but it's a really good skill to learn to make sure you can do that. Unreal Engine, Blender, Unity, all game engines. What is a game engine? A game engine is what allows a coder to let an artist be creative without having to program, basically. So you could even argue that a game engine is kind of like a framework. But the game engine is doing all of the complex geometry math, all the physics, all of the stuff that you don't think about when you're playing a video game, but realize at the end of the day that a video game is running on a computer and that the computer has to work in binary, right? So think about a game engine as kind of a framework for artists. They can be open source. They can also be very expensive to license, and game studios get very proprietary about them, depending on which one you're using. Unity, I guess, is technically also an IDE because it has its own software that you can create in it. But I am not a game designer. I do not have expertise there. So take all of that with a grain of salt. Assembly, old language. TensorFlow is used for, it's really machine learning. By extension, that is kind of the next evolution of data analysis. It is Google supported, but I believe open sourced.
Just had a question about assembly real quick.
Yeah.
Does anybody still use assembly for anything?
No.
I see occasionally on YouTube for coding.
It's because it's such an old language, some of the older languages are easier to get started in. But I don't think I've ever seen a job description hiring still for assembly. That's not to say that it's not worth learning if you find a mentor and the mentor is like, I've got so many people I'm trying to hire for assembly and no one knows it anymore. Just because it is what we call a legacy language does not mean that it is a dead language, right? People still learn Latin even though no one is speaking Latin. There's a reason for that. It's because there are still things that we are learning from Roman history that we need Latin to understand. This just happens to be 40 years ago instead of 2,000 years ago. But yeah, language assembly is definitely what I would consider a legacy language or a dying language. Godot, this does get an X for, I did not know this. It is a game engine. I'm trying to go quickly through these. Ubuntu, Mac OS, Windows, all on OS. Hexadecimal is not really a dev tool. It's what we call a text encoding scheme. UTF-8 is what we try to use everywhere now because UTF-8 not only supports Western characters like Chinese and Japanese and all of that stuff. But the real reason that we need UTF-8, which is one of the newer text encoding schemes, is emoji support. Believe it or not, that is a major problem in storing text. Someone will put an emoji in your app and it will crash the whole database. So text encoding is basically how do we take what we see as a letter and store it in binary, so that the computer can not only write that to memory but also read it from memory and convert it back into a letter. So we don't do a ton with ASCII and hexadecimal only because all the programming languages that we are using kind of take care of that stuff for us. But if you ever get into things like setting up Bluetooth communication, you may need to get into ASCII and hexadecimal and base 10 versus base 16 numbers and all that kind of stuff, but we won't be touching any of that. Arduino is an OS and a language. It is primarily used for robotics. We don't do anything with hardware in our boot camp. However, it is a great starting point, not only for kids, but just getting into programming and understanding kind of how things are working. Arduino is similar to Raspberry Pi, which is more of a hardware concept. Raspberry Pis are just little computers, basically, that don't usually come with screens, but my bot that runs the server that uploads the video at the end of class is built on something similar to a Raspberry Pi. Machine learning is a concept. Ross, you said was an OS for robotics.
It stands for robot.
Okay.
It's just another, it says, provides libraries and tools known software developers to create robot applications.
So we'll also throw framework on that. That does get a X for me for thing I did not know.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So for the Raspberry Pi, do you know if the library still has theirs? The one in the,
I think they do. Raspberry Pis for the entire pandemic were like impossible to get because they weren't manufacturing them. And the cost went from like $40 to like $200. They have now started to finally come down. And so they're starting to get closer to like the $60 range, but now they have multiple models of them, so you can get various amounts of RAM and whatever. Unless you have a project in mind for Raspberry Pi, I would recommend holding off on that. Raspberry Pi can be great for getting into like home automation or running your own web server without having to pay for hosting. Raspberry Pis are really cool. And if you're into them, OpenHack, there are a lot of people at OpenHack that also are into Raspberry Pi. But just think about basically a mini computer that you can use as a server, and you can run almost any programming language on this list on a Raspberry Pi. Maybe not some of the game engines, but other than those. So you can run your JavaScript code, your Python code, whatever on a Raspberry Pi. And the main benefit of that is that it can be running 24 hours a day without you worrying about shutting down your laptop or something like that. So I've got a pass with Raspberry Pi. I built a project in college where you could swipe your ID card into the classroom, and that's how it would take track of attendance. So I built that all on a Raspberry Pi with PHP. Definitely a cool thing to play with, but not something we'll cover in the curriculum. But yeah, the libraries may have them.
the one in the gallery? I know they did have like their maker.
The makerspace, yeah.
Makerspace. That's what
And they have a cool like recording booth that you can use for podcasts and video editing software and all kinds of cool stuff. I'm a big library guy, so use your libraries. Your taxes are going to them in one way or another, so you might as well benefit from them. MATLAB is both a dev tool and a language and an IDE. It is for data analysis, but also mathematical analysis, which are kind of the same. Minitab kind of falls into that same dev tool IDE space. I'm not huge experts with either MATLAB or Minitab, only because I usually work with data sets that are too big for both of them. So I tend to write most of my analytical stuff in SQL, but I'm also not a mathematician. So both of those tools are kind of for people outside of the development space who need development but need it specialized in whatever industry they're in. Wireshark is a dev tool. It is for analyzing network packets. That is getting more into the networking side of things than the programming side of things. We will be using the Google Chrome network tab, which is kind of like the step before Wireshark for understanding how the internet is working. However, if you want to understand how networks work, how IP addresses work, how subnets work, how encryption works, how you can see the data that's getting sent on your router, what's encrypted, what isn't encrypted, all kinds of protocols around that, text encoding, which we have up earlier. Wireshark is kind of the go-to tool for debugging and understanding network traffic. We don't touch Wireshark, however, it's definitely a cool tool if you want to get into network. Command prompt, another dev tool, just like the terminal. Different command prompts will run different what we call shells. Mac used Bash for the longest time, which was Linux's. It now uses something called ZSH, which is very similar, another evolution. Postman is a dev tool that we will be using for debugging our APIs. So an application programming interface is designed to only be talked to from another application. However, sometimes we want a user interface that we can debug with our APIs. Flash is fortunately dead. It is I'm going to call a language and an IDE. It was what? Flash games, yes. Originally built by Macromedia, bought by Adobe, killed by Steve Jobs. Huge battery suck. Fortunately, JavaScript has replaced a lot of the interactivity that Flash enabled. I mean, you could technically argue that there was a game engine as part of it. Flash was in the early 2000s the hot shit, and now has fortunately died off for better technologies. And ladder logic, this final one gets next for me. I do not know ladder logic.
If you're gonna program PLCs and stuff like that, I mean.
Okay. So now that we've gone through that, how are you feeling? You feeling like you're understanding a little bit more of, hey, a lot of these tools are falling under the same idea, right? All right, I didn't know that Postgres was a SQL database, but now that I know it's a SQL database, I know it's related to SQLite and MySQL, right? A lot of the web servers that you're seeing on here, right? We've got Ruby on Rails. Okay, I can understand what that relationship is now, right? So the last thing that we're going to look at tonight is, this is great if you're a list person, but everyone's going to learn differently, right? If you learn through hands-on project experience and actually doing it, following along with me or a video, you are going to nail this cohort, right? That is how I teach. That is my teaching style. However, I know that not everyone's going to learn that way, right? And so what we will try and do is have in those optional reading assignments something to not only get you started as a precursor to what's going to be going on in class. And there's pre-reading assignments you don't have to master, you don't have to understand the ins and outs of it, but the goal for them is to give you exposure, right? Because there are so many different ways of learning programming that if you're not hands-on, you're going to want to lean into those resources a little bit more. If you are hands-on, you're probably going to do the best. However, I have learned that there are certain things that hands-on just doesn't teach. This is all great, but you're going to go cross-eyed looking at a spreadsheet trying to understand all of this, right? And so sometimes you just need a visual to understand what's everything that we're going to be learning. So you won't get that too much from me in this cohort, but you will get it every now and then. And so now that we understand how all of these categories and terms all fit together, let's look at a visual of what we're going to be learning over the next 24 weeks. So you've heard of the front end, right? The front end is what the user is interacting with. It's not always written in code. Usually for the web, it's written in HTML. And then there are frameworks like Bootstrap and React. We'll be learning both of those to make it easier to not only build the visual of the front end, but to make it interactive. So the front end is, think about the computer that the person is on, the phone the person is on, what they are seeing through the screen, and what code is actually running on that device. That is all the front end. You will also hear that called the user experience, right? And that's what we're going to start learning tomorrow, how to design, how to draw that user experience. We also have the back end, right? The back end is what we think about as the cloud, about the server, about the DevOps. That is what is happening out on the internet. That is what has left the device, and all that it takes to make that front end work and show up is powered by the back end. The back end sending all of that information through. Now, we think about that as kind of the more data side of things, right? The database, the API, all of that. On the front end, we've got the web browser. That's what's actually running our code. That's Safari or Chrome or Firefox. And that web browser is going to be running 3 languages: HTML, how do we structure our content? Our CSS, how do we style that content and lay that content out based off of what's in our HTML? And our JavaScript, how do we make that interactive? And then finally, we have React, which is the JavaScript framework that's going to kind of meld all three of those together. If HTML, CSS, and JavaScript had a Frankenstein baby, React is the framework that would have come out of it. We won't be touching React until the second half of the class. We want to get your fundamentals down with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. React is something that about 75% of students learn and they go, I didn't understand HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but now that I understand React, I understand the other three. And the other 25% of people learn React and they go, I don't understand why we're learning this. I want to just do everything in the first three. Both are okay. Then on the back end, we have our API server, right? That's what's running up in the cloud. And that API server is still written in JavaScript, but it's going to be using Node.js, which is kind of like the browser. That's what's running the code. And then Express is a framework that makes Node.js easier to interact with. So just like React makes it easier for us to build a front end, Express makes it easier for us to build a server or a back end. We also have the database server. We're going to be using Postgres, but Postgres is written in the SQL programming, well, query language. It's not technically a programming language, but that's semantics. And so those two are going to get connected together, right? So our front end can never talk to the database server directly for security reasons. Our database server always connects into an API server. That API server is what's going to be running the SQL queries back and forth between the web browser. Then we connect the web browser and API server together with an API or application programming interface. And the data format that uses is called JSON. Not JSON, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Yes, JS, JavaScript, you won't be able to escape it, but it is not quite the same as a JavaScript object, but pretty similar, right? That is the agreed upon standard. Some newer ones are using something called GraphQL. Some older ones are using a standard called XML. There are some even older ones, but JSON is pretty much the de facto agreed upon standard. And the kind of interesting thing is no matter what your API server is built in, whether that's Ruby or PHP or Python or JavaScript, they all use JSON to send the information. Why is that? Well, we don't have an agreed upon standard. Everyone hasn't gone, Node.js is how we're going to build every server from here on out. But everyone's agreed for the web browser that JavaScript is the way that the web is interactive. And so because so many servers are sending information back to the web browser and that data is being consumed by JavaScript, everyone has just agreed, let's use JSON for everything. So that is what we will be learning. This is going to take you 24 weeks. By the end of this 24 weeks, you're going to come back to this diagram and say, I don't understand how such a simple diagram can take so much to execute. But we've done it. We know that the vast majority of our students not only graduate, but graduate with a project that can show off not only a feature, but can also show off that they understand all of this knowledge and they've learned it over these 24 weeks. So this is everything that we will be learning coming up. With all of that said, to give you a preview for tomorrow, we will be downloading VS Code. If you don't have it downloaded, we will be making sure that you can all sign into Zoom because one, all of our classes are going remote after this or after Thursday's class. Next Monday's class will be our first remote class. But we want to make sure you have it set up and that you can share your screen because sharing your screen in macOS is a somewhat of a tricky privacy thing. So we'll walk you through that. We'll make sure everyone's comfortable with that. And then tomorrow we will start our first project on requirements gathering, learning about wireframing, and diving into user experience. Don't get used to me letting you out early. I will normally keep you until 8:30. But because it is the first class, I will let you guys out a little early. I will also hang out here. If you have any questions, same place, same time tomorrow. I may have monitors for you, but most likely that will be on Wednesday. And that's all I got for you. Oh, Mo, sorry, I just saw your question. COBOL and IBM do have a storied history together. Yes. Yes, if you have not filled out the common space survey, that is in Canvas. Please fill that out. It will only take you 2 minutes, and the sooner everyone can fill that out, the sooner I can get you memberships. Yes.
How much would it be for 24-hour access?
Based off of how many students we have responding, we usually can cover the cost, the full cost of the 24-hour membership. But if it's an additional cost, it would be somewhere in the $25 to $50 range a month.
Okay.
Are we able to access the list we made?
Yes, so in order to access that, if you go to, it's kind of convoluted, but if you go to Canvas and go to modules and then daily outlines, the daily outline is where you're going to get your like rundown of everything that I plan. It's basically my lesson plan. And you'll see in there that both the diagram that I just went over and the stack brainstorming are both linked there. Yeah. Other questions?
Do you work from here as well, or do you do home?
I usually work from home only because I've got two 28-inch monitors that are a little bit more comfortable to work from. And I live alone, so it's a little quieter for me. I'm also somewhat of an audiophile, so I can't work without listening to music. I mean, teaching is separate, but so I'm normally at home. However, I'm definitely not opposed to in person. And there are also times where like I'll already be downtown and I'm like, oh, well, I might as well just work from there. So I'm happy to meet here. I'm happy to meet at libraries or at coffee shops. I very rarely work from here, but I do have a membership as part of class. So every now and then you'll find me down here. Yeah. Yes.
So going over all these like categories.
Yeah.
They're like are these like the widely accepted like terms for those categories?
For the most part, yeah. So, you know, framework versus library, that's like if you accidentally called a library a framework, no one would bat an eye at that, right? You know, for certain ones, especially the broad ones like Java, well, Java can be used for building a web server. It can be used for building a desktop application. It can be used for so many different things that if you ask someone like, what kind of programming language is Java, they're not going to have a succinct answer for you, or they can tell you what they use it for, but they don't necessarily know how it compares to building a web server because they don't build web servers using Java in particular, that particular developer. So there's certain things that everyone understands. You know, JavaScript is used to write things in the browser, but not everyone may know that JavaScript can also be used to build a web server using Node.js because they write their code in Ruby. So there are certain things where you're not going to be wrong if you say something in, you know, on that list. But at the same time, that list may be too broad for what the other developer that you're talking to does with that language.
So like if I say like for like OpenHack, for instance, like
Yeah.
you kind of like get something out of something like you know what communication tools you use or what dev tools you
Yes.
use.
Yes.
Is that kind of why they said those are what I mean?
Yes. And they may go, well, what do you mean by dev tools? Do you mean what do I use to access an API, or do you mean what I write my code in? Both can be dev tools. One's Postman, the other one's VS Code or WebStorm or Notepad++ or Vim or, you know, whatever, right? So the person may push back on you a little bit and say, well, I use a lot of dev tool. Everything that I use is a dev tool. So normally a good place to start is like, what's your job title? Because someone may come to OpenHack and be like, I'm a data visualization expert. I've never written a line of code, but I can make really beautiful things out of data, right? And now you've got a better concept of, oh, well, you're probably not, the dev tools that you're using are probably not going to align with the dev tools that I'm using. So starting with job title can be really good. And then the other thing is be prepared for them to ask you questions, right? Have your 30-second elevator pitch ready, right? And that is going to be very different in 6 months than it is right now. But think about if someone asks you to introduce yourself, Don't just, I'm another careers and code student. Well, there are gonna be 20 of you at Open Hack, right? So that's not enough. So start thinking about your bio a little bit, right? Of like, what makes you unique as a student? What are you hoping to get out of the cohort? What are you most excited to learn? What job title would you like after this program, which we'll talk a little bit more about tomorrow. Right, that's what you want to start thinking about, of what information am I curious about myself, and what am I curious about other people who are already in the space, and what are they doing? And that's kind of the beauty of Open Hack. But you got a month to prep for that, so I won't be putting you on the spot yet. Have an awesome night, everyone. I will hang around for the next couple minutes in case anyone has questions. Otherwise, I will see you tomorrow, same time, same place.